Tonight at 10, Theresa May promises a mainstream government to deliver for mainstream Britain. The Prime Minister went to Halifax to unveil the Conservative manifesto, warning that failure in the Brexit talks would be dire for Britain. She promised to be upfront and straight with voters, warning that the next 5 years will be challenging ones.
Come with me as I lead Britain. Strengthen my hand as I fight for Britain, and stand with me as I deliver for Britain.
One of the most radical changes would affect social care in England. Critics say it is unfair to those with long-lasting illness. We'll be asking some of West Yorkshire's voters what they made of the manifesto. And we'll be looking at the Conservative plans to reduce levels of immigration. Also tonight, in Washington, a special investigator is appointed to examine claims of collusion between the Trump team and Russia.
The entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians. Zero.
A man who tried to hire a hitman to kill his partner is facing a life sentence after being found guilty of soliciting murder. And some of the best images ever taken, we take a look at the famous archive of Magnum photos on its 70th anniversary.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, can life away from the lane begin with a win for Tottenham Hotspur? They travel to Leicester City in the Premier League.
Good evening. Theresa May has published the Conservative manifesto, promising a mainstream government to deliver for mainstream Britain. She said a strong economy and delivering a successful Brexit were the main priorities. Well, the manifesto includes reform of social care in England to include the value of property in qualifying for home care. There'd be changes in the way the state pension is protected against rising prices. There'd be more funding for schools in England, but free lunches would no longer be available for all pupils. And the Conservatives would keep the same controversial target on immigration, aiming for a net figure of less than 100,000 a year. We'll have more detail for you and reaction. We start with our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg.
Outside. Inside. Theresa May says she wants to end political tribes. Tell them.
They are getting rid of your nurses. I have been a nurse for 27 years. We are on our knees.
The Tory manifesto is meant to be a blueprint for what she now calls the mainstream. Yet with protesters at the gates, the Tories were whisked in behind tight lines to make their case. With Brexit the backdrop, Theresa May's ambitions plainly far wider than that.
I believe that our United Kingdom can emerge from this period of national change stronger, fairer, and more prosperous than ever before. And I believe we can and must take this opportunity to build a great meritocracy here in Britain. Let us be in no doubt, it will not be easy. But with discipline and focus, effort and hard work, and above all, a unity of purpose stretching across this precious union of nations, from north to south and east to west, I believe we can and must go forward together.
But all that depends on getting the mind-bendingly complicated Brexit right. If you were looking for detail of how, it wasn't here today.
But all of this depends on getting the next 5 years right. If we fail, the consequences for Britain and for the economic security of ordinary working people will be dire. If we succeed, the opportunities ahead of us are great.
Those are, she says, a long-term solution to caring for the elderly, more or less matching Labour's promise of cash for the NHS and new grammar schools, but the same broken target for immigration, fewer free hot meals at primary school. And for the Tories, who've been in charge already for 7 years, pushing back the promise to clear the deficit until 2025. But her finale, a contentious claim to stand for all.
For too many people in Britain today, life is simply much harder than many seem to think or realise. They're not ideological. They don't buy into grand visions. They aren't fooled by politicians who promise the earth and claim no tough choices are required. They make those choices every day in their own lives and understand that politicians who aspire to lead must do the same. With the right Brexit deal secured, my mainstream government will deliver for mainstream Britain. So I offer myself as your Prime Minister. Come with me as I lead Britain. Strengthen my hand as I fight for Britain, and stand with me as I deliver for Britain. And with confidence in ourselves and a unity of purpose in our country, let us all go forward together.
Ovation inside,
Right, you've not got to block, you can't block this.
but anger outside.
Tories in a mill in Yorkshire, you couldn't make it up.
Austerity is 7 years old.
What do you think of the Tories coming to Yorkshire today?
I think it's a disgrace, Laura.
Why?
They're not welcome, they're not welcome. They're not welcome because for the past 6 years they've been running our industries down.
One of the Tories' biggest claims is that Jeremy Corbyn wants to take us to the 1970s. I think she wants to take us to the 1870s. Absolutely ridiculous.
You are ditching much of the manifesto that you and your party stood on just 2 years ago. More families, including traditional Tory voters, will have to pay more for elderly care. Many families will lose hot meals for their children at school. You're pushing back balancing the books again, and your immigration proposals might cost billions to the economy. Now, when you put that all together, wouldn't some voters be quite entitled to conclude that adds up to quite a bleak picture?
No, not at all. What I'm putting forward is a vision for opportunity and prosperity across the whole of the country for the future. I've been clear there are some hard choices that need to be taken. It's making sure we're honest with the public.
This is a bit of a bleak picture.
It's wrapped up as a new kind of sensible conservatism. But is everyone signed up?
Okay, well, the entire cabinet has just filed past right at the end of the Prime Minister's speech. Unfortunately, none of us wants to talk to us about whether or not this truly is a new kind of conservatism and whether or not they are all happy about what she's just outlined.
Her pitch is safety first, but there are dangers in her plans. As the Prime Minister left through jeers and protests, her dream of an end to left and right will seem a long way off. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Halifax.
Well, as we've heard, one of the 5 giant challenges outlined by Mrs May was how to deal with an ageing society. She plans to reform the way social care in England is funded by requiring more people to pay for care at home. The value of property would be factored into calculations, and anyone with a property worth more than £100,000 would be liable. Our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt has been taking a closer look at the Conservatives' social care plan.
Yeah, they're on fire, so it's called Burning Daylight.
At the heart of the crisis in social care that Theresa May says she wants to fix are real lives. People like Andriani and her son Alex. She has dementia.
What was that, hello? What type of flower has thorns? I don't know. Roses.
Oh, roses.
It's a rose bush.
This was 2014. Andriani had sold her small house in London to pay for residential care, which was costing more than £60,000 a year.
She was able to walk, she was able to hold a conversation, she was able to enjoy a walk around the gardens. Right, let's go and get a cup of tea. Since then she's deteriorated quite a lot, and we can have a look at the garden. She's now essentially forgotten how to walk, and she can't really speak very much.
And this year, Andriani's care will cost almost £100,000.
Do you remember when we were living at Highfield? Every morning I'd make you a cup of tea. Do you remember?
Andriani does get NHS help now, but the family will still contribute nearly £40,000 a year. Under the Tory plans, the 64-year-old would benefit from being allowed to keep more of her money, but her son says it does nothing about these huge costs.
I'd like to say that the system is broken at the moment, because if the system was broken, then potentially it could be fixed. But having seen it from the inside, I don't think we have a system at all. If you get one type of disease, you're covered by the NHS. If you get another type of disease, it's a social care issue.
At the moment, in England, people only get council-funded help with social care if they have assets and savings of less than about £23,000. The Conservatives want to increase that threshold to £100,000. But for the first time, people needing home care will, like those in residential care, have the value of their house included in these calculations. So, if you have a home and other assets worth £100,000, you get council help. But say the value is £300,000. Then you'll have to spend 2/3 of that on care before getting local authority support. You wouldn't have to sell up though, as deferred payments would mean costs are covered by a person's estate once they die.
We're saying that everyone will have the confidence of knowing that they can pass on £100,000 to their children and grandchildren, but there are trade-offs in order to make that commitment, and we will be treating people who have care at home in the same way as people who are cared for in care homes.
But existing government plans to limit the high costs some people with the greatest needs face would be scrapped. Sir Andrew Dilnot wrote the report that recommended this cap on costs. He says the new plans don't go far enough.
The certainty here is that if you have assets in total, including the value of your house, of more than £100,000, then basically you're on your own. You've got to pay for yourself until you get down to that level. So for most people, the prospect is one that if they need social care, they're going to have to pay.
I think those purple flowers are the nicest. They look like...
The care system is different in each UK nation, but all are struggling to find ways to ease these pressures. The test of the Conservative proposals will be whether or not they help people plan for the future, whatever it holds. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Well, as we've heard, the Conservative manifesto repeats the promise first made back in 2010 to reduce annual net migration to the tens of thousands. And it proposes new measures, including a £2,000 annual charge on companies for every skilled worker they employ from outside the European Union. So what does business think of that and some of the other measures in the Conservative manifesto? Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports now.
This is a new look for the Conservative Party. The old-fashioned Tory relationship with business has had a makeover with this manifesto. For companies like this fashion technology firm, there was a new deterrent to hiring workers from outside the EU, a new attempt to bring down immigration. Last year, 273,000 more people arrived in the UK than left. Of that number, 164,000 were from outside the EU. 56,000 of them were classified as skilled workers. A Conservative government would double the cost of employing them from a recently introduced £1,000 to £2,000 per employee per year.
A third of our employees are non-EU. This is something that's basically sending the wrong signals to the type of talent we want to bring into our organisation, and it's something that's going to hit our bottom line. When at the same time we are facing calls for us to come to other places like Singapore and Hong Kong, where they will pay us to do that. You know, we want to compete against the best, and we need the best in our country.
Access to the right skills is near the top of many businesses' wish list, and in a time of really low unemployment like now, they are in short supply. So sometimes you have to go overseas, and businesses are worried that by making that more difficult and more expensive, the burden on business increases and the economy will suffer.
But property developer Richard Tice, who campaigned to leave the EU, says this is the kind of nudge business needs to think UK first.
Rather than just being able to look for the cheapest way of finding people from around the world, actually, first of all, they've got to think, how can we help find young British people and give them the skills so they can help our firms? If that's still not available, then yes, look overseas, but you've got to pay for it.
Business, big and small, could find comfort in a commitment to low corporation taxes, for example, but some are feeling under attack from all parties.
We constantly need to remind our political leaders that it is the private sector, it is British business, it is companies of all shapes and sizes that drive the wealth agenda of this country. We need support, and we must not allow them, with enormous respect to all political parties, to forget that mantra.
If the blue team wins, there will be no light touch, price caps, pay constraint, merger controls. Business will be facing a Tory government that is very much hands-on. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, at today's launch, Theresa May underlined the need for a stronger economy. On taxes, there was a promise not to raise VAT, but no pledge on income tax or national insurance. On pensions, David Cameron's promise to protect the state pension by what's called a triple lock, well, that's also been dropped. And another previous Conservative pledge to balance the books has been modified. Well, our economics editor Kamal Ahmed looks at the Conservative promises on the economy.
The target of balancing the books has been pushed into the future yet again. The triple tax lock has been abandoned. The promise on how much pensions will rise by changed. Theresa May laid out a new Tory prospectus for the country, making it clear that the old approach of David Cameron was history. Let's start with the Tories' attitude to borrowing, or eliminating the deficit. That's balancing the amount the government raises in taxes with what it spends. Last autumn, the Chancellor said he wanted to achieve this long-held Tory goal as early as possible in the next Parliament. Many economists took that to mean by 2022. Today, the manifesto changes that target to 2025. Theresa May has given herself room to borrow more if the economy needs it.
Philip Hammond is probably no longer trying to balance the books by the year 2022. It's now been pushed back to 2025, which means they're still trying to reduce government borrowing, but it gives them more wiggle room in case the worst happens with the Brexit deal and they can spend more money and support the economy.
On tax, there has also been a change. In 2015, David Cameron promised no increases in income tax, national insurance or VAT. Only one of those remains, no increase in VAT. The rest have been replaced with a rather vaguer, firm intention to reduce taxes. Many now predict national insurance contributions at least will rise.
The tax lock over this Parliament meant the government couldn't raise income tax, national insurance or VAT. They raise 2/3 of all of the taxes we bring in. That's very constraining for a government. I think it's sensible to say that if you need to, you can make some adjustments.
And then pensions. In 2015, the Conservatives promised a triple lock, that pensions would increase by either the rate of inflation, the rate of earnings growth or 2.5%, whichever was highest. That is now a double lock. Inflation or earnings will be used, which could mean lower pensions increases if both fall below 2.5%. The Conservative leader has given herself more wriggle room on the economy. She can borrow more, tax more, and has opened the door to lower increases in pensions. One striking feature of the manifesto, very few costings. Mrs May doesn't want her hands tied. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
So, in her own words, Mrs May set out to be upfront and straight with the voters. The launch took place in Halifax in West Yorkshire, so our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar went in search of voters there, asking for their views in a seat that was narrowly held by Labour at the last election.
The Tories turn to deal, but what'll they make of it? Pensions up, though maybe not as much. More would pay for care, and no spreading the cost of care, at home or residential, through social insurance.
No bid.
Are you sure?
I'm perfectly sure, yeah. I've got nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is Theresa May's hand strong enough with older voters, with the players at the Halifax Contract Bridge Association?
It would grieve me if I was in a home and I was paying a fortune, which it is these days, and the person sat next to me wasn't paying anything.
Yeah. We just
And
feel wrong.
I think that's sad.
You think if you've got the money, if you can afford it, you should pay for your own care?
Pretty much so, yes. Yes. I think that you've got a long time to plan this, so yes.
So, Theresa May, is she popular with you?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because she reminds me of Margaret Thatcher.
She does?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, she seems to know what she wants to do, but she has a gentler way of doing it. I just think she's like myself, really, but more intelligent, you know.
Party leaders normally take unpopular decisions after they're elected. Now, Theresa May risks upsetting a lot of the older people you can normally count on to vote. She's clearly convinced by opinion polls which suggest they're most likely to back her, the aces in her election hand. She's bidding to win bigger than any Tory leader since Margaret Thatcher, and that means scooping up a lot of the voters you would normally never expect the Tories to tuck away.
Mrs May's sights are on blue-collar Britain. How's her aim at the Halifax Snooker Club?
I actually voted to come out of Europe basically on immigration alone. That was our biggest issue, and most of my friends who are Labour all voted the same.
It could hurt the economy maybe if you start cutting down numbers of migrants in the wrong way.
Well, there are a lot of unemployed people around without the migrants.
If she does lower the immigration numbers, I'm very happy. I'm undecided as well this time, yeah.
But you voted last time, how?
I voted Labour last time.
Not everyone's happy. Ask the mums and grandmas at the Toddlers Play Palace up the road about the plans for Tory spending and Tory cuts.
So, no more free lunches for all in infant school, that's the plan.
Well, that's really disappointing because I've worked in schools for the past 15 years and I can honestly say that a guaranteed school meal benefits all children.
But there'd be more money for spending in other ways at school.
Well, then they ought to be able to find both.
Theresa May says there's no such thing as Mayism, but there is. It's about trying to convince the country that Britain after Brexit will be fairer than before. It's about the state doing more, but doing it with no more money. There's been no clearer choice of future in decades. Maybe as big a choice as we, any of us, are likely to see again. John Pienaar, BBC News, Halifax.
And you can find out more about the party manifestos. It's all online for you. Have a look at our website, bbc.co.uk/election 2017, and the details are there. In the meantime, let's go live to Halifax and talk to Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor. Laura, can we talk about this manifesto today in the context of Theresa May's talk about mainstream government?
Hugh, well, saying she wants to be a mainstream government for the mainstream, well, it sounds like rather a clever, if rather a potentially meaningless slogan. But what does she actually mean by it? Well, the first thing to say about Theresa May is she doesn't see herself as any sort of grand philosopher. That's not because she doesn't have any ideas, but I think it's because she believes that's not the type of politician she wants to be, but also believes it's not particularly what voters want either. And I think it also means that she doesn't want to feel tied to any particular strand of Tory thinking. So we've seen that today. You know, she's quite happy to distance herself from the really untrammeled free markets of the past. She's quite happy to bring back controversial, rather old-fashioned sounding ideas like grammar schools, for example. Quite happy too to take a big risk of pulling back some benefits for older voters. But right over on the other spectrum, she's also quite happy, in not a very Tory way, to poke government's nose into business more aggressively, even if that means business is not quite sure about her. But I think more than anything, this idea of a mainstream politician for the mainstream tells us that she is determined to try to scoop up votes in every corner of the country, whether that's taking votes from Labour here in Yorkshire, from the SNP in Scotland, holding off the Lib Dem challenge in the southwest, or appealing to UKIP voters everywhere. She wants to take on all comers, and she wants to suggest that in 2017 the Tories can appeal, well, to just about everyone. Now, of course, that is much easier to say than it is actually to deliver. And the reality check, of course, is we are still in an era where public spending is very, very tight. Cuts will continue. With inflation ticking up and wage growth slow, there are plenty of voters around the country who are feeling the pinch and not necessarily in the mood to give the Tories another chance. And of course, the complications of Brexit means whatever else she's promising could be derailed by that becoming extremely difficult and not just hard to deliver, but also potentially very nasty. So broadly, though, as with any political idea, a mainstream leader for the mainstream, easier to say than to prove.
Laura, again, thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg there with the latest thoughts there in Halifax. Let's have a look at the day's other main news then. President Trump has declared that he is the victim of the greatest political witch hunt in US history. He was responding to news that a special investigator has been appointed to look at claims of Russian interference in the presidential election last year and of alleged links between the Trump team and Russian officials. The man who leads the inquiry is Robert Mueller. He is a former director of the FBI. Our Washington correspondent, Ali Makboul, takes up the story.
The president's just not happy with the scrutiny he continues to come under over his links with Russia.
The entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians, zero. I think it divides the country. I think we have a very divided country because of that and many other things.
Have you had any recollection where you've wondered if anything you have done has been something that might be worthy of criminal charges in these investigations or impeachment, as some on the left are implying?
I think it's totally ridiculous. Everybody thinks so. And again, we have to get back to working our country properly so that we can take care of the problems that we have. We have plenty of problems.
The major development of the last 24 hours is the appointment of Robert Mueller to oversee the Russia investigation.
The record reflect that Director
He's a
Mueller
man renowned for his
responded
independence, having been appointed FBI director by George W. Bush and being asked to serve on longer than his term by Barack Obama. And his appointments received support from many on both sides of the aisle.
Probably the best thing that has happened is that the Deputy Attorney General did appoint Bob Mueller, a man of impeccable integrity, to act as special counsel in this issue, and that, I think, is of some comfort to all of us in this country.
I believe that the professionals of the Justice Department need to do their jobs independently, objectively, and thoroughly, and I believe the special counsel, which is Robert Mueller now, helps them do that.
Some of the president's critics, while happy with the appointment, complain Robert Mueller hasn't been given enough power. But what exactly is he investigating? Well, it breaks down into three main areas. Russian influence on the election, looking at possible hacking and leaks. Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, so meetings or financial ties between the two. And obstruction of the Russia inquiry, looking at whether Donald Trump tried to get the former FBI director to drop key parts of the investigation. Well, after the president fired the last man leading the inquiry, it does now feel, with this appointment, that the Russia investigation can now get back on track. But there are many who feel that Donald Trump, for whatever reason, is not particularly behaving like a man who wants that. Aleem Makboul, BBC News in Washington.
Let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now then. An 18-year-old woman has been killed and 22 others injured after a suspected drunk driver mounted the pavement in his car while driving the wrong way through New York's Times Square. The car eventually stopped after hitting a pole, and the 26-year-old driver was then arrested. Police are investigating the deaths of 8 babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital. They were called in by staff concerned about the high death rate in the year to June 2016. They're also reviewing the deaths of 7 other babies and a number who became seriously ill during the same period. In America, the Pentagon has said that the US-led coalition is not stepping up involvement in Syria's civil war after coalition aircraft attacked a convoy of pro-Assad government militia. The convoy was thought to be heading for an airbase on the border, which the coalition uses to train opposition forces. Rolf Harris will be released on bail from Stafford Prison in the morning. The entertainer is still on trial at Southwark Crown Court, accused of indecently assaulting 3 teenagers between 1971 and 1983. He's expected to appear in court in person and denies all the charges against him. A former television producer has been convicted of trying to hire 3 men to kill his partner. The Old Bailey heard that David Harris, who's 68 and from Amberley in West Sussex, had wanted to be rid of Hazel Allinson so that he could inherit her fortune and then live with his 28-year-old girlfriend. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has the story.
For 30 years, David Harris and Hazel Allinson were partners. But Harris had a secret. Ugne Chekavichute, a woman he'd met in a brothel. But he couldn't afford to wine and dine her. So Harris tried to trick not 1, not 2, but 3 innocent men into becoming hitmen. His aim was to get rid of Hazel and get his hands on their £800,000 house here in West Sussex. Harris on the left was secretly recorded by one of the so-called hitmen who was alarmed by the plan.
I mean, whatever happens, you know, the 150 grand is there, that's yours. And it obviously, whatever happens, it will look like an accident or a mugging gone wrong or something.
Another of the supposed hitmen was Duke Dean, who met Harris in London. Dean said he couldn't believe what Harris wanted and went to the police. Did you get the impression he was serious about getting rid of Hazel?
I was quite stone serious about that.
That's what he wanted.
That's what he wanted.
Harris told police he was researching a hitman novel like Day of the Jackal and wanted to meet a real hitman, but police say the book didn't exist.
This is a man who in fact was a very manipulative, conniving and ruthless individual.
Detectives say Harris was driven by greed and lust, but thankfully failed 3 times to kill the woman he'd spent his life with. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
Tributes have been paid by members of all parties to the former Labour First Minister of Wales, Rhodri Morgan, who's died at the age of 77. He was widely credited with bringing stability to the National Assembly after it was created in 1999, and colleagues have singled out his ability to communicate with people of all backgrounds in a political career that spanned more than 4 decades. Our Wales correspondent Sian Lloyd has this report.
Rhodri Morgan strove throughout his career for Wales to have a stronger political voice. With the establishment of the National Assembly, his vision was realised, and among the many tributes paid today, he's been described as the father of Welsh devolution. He was First Minister for almost a decade, but wasn't Tony Blair's choice as Labour leader in Wales. He took over following the resignation of his predecessor, Alan Michael, and is widely credited with having brought stability to the fledgling institution, which had a turbulent start.
He was the person who took the Assembly from being something that was still not hugely supported, not widely supported by the people of Wales, not anything like as supported as it is now, to being an institution that people understand, an institution that's very much part of our lives in Wales.
This is too much. Let's get it into touch, come on.
He was a proud Welshman who loved sport, sharing the nation's passion for rugby and not afraid to let it show. Rhodri Morgan didn't have the polished appearance of many modern-day politicians and didn't speak in the usual sound bites either.
Rhodri Morgan, will you run again for leadership of the Welsh Labour Party?
Do one-legged ducks swim in a circle?
He's been remembered at the Welsh Assembly, and as a mark of respect, election campaigning was suspended here today.
The tributes to Rhodri Morgan, the former First Minister of Wales, who's died at the age of 77. Now, it's 70 years since the world's most prestigious photographic agency, Magnum Photos, was established by 4 brilliant photographers who'd been deeply affected by the events of the Second World War. Their work has included some of the most iconic images ever captured. And our arts editor, Will Gompertz, has been looking through the famous Magnum archive on its 70th anniversary.
D-Day, as seen by Robert Capa, the famous Hungarian war photographer who in 1947 joined forces with Henri Cartier-Bresson, the great chronicler of 20th century life, to form, with 3 others, the Magnum Photo Agency, a cooperative of like-minded photographers whose mission was to go to whatever lengths were necessary to capture the decisive moment.
You can tell a Magnum picture a mile away. Such style. These pictures that we're looking at here on this table, the Capas, you know, the Elliott Erwitts, the Cartier-Bressons, they have lasted all through that picture of Cartier-Bresson taken, you know, on the riverbank is a great photograph today, let alone 50 years ago. And that's, I think, if you can take a photograph that lasts, then you've got a Magnum photograph.
How do you go about, we've got a contact sheet here, Eamon. How does a picture editor go about choosing the image which is going to tell the story out of that lot?
Well, I mean, this is a privilege to look at Bruno Barnaby's 1968 Paris riot. It's just fantastic. There's a saying in photography, if you're not close enough, you're not good enough. And these are a time of 35mm photography, getting in really close. I mean, you can smell the gases there, the action. This is the classic one where the kid is, you know, he's got a sort of a weapon of some sort and he's taking the police on.
Magnum helped shape the way we saw and felt about the world in China, Mexico, Afghanistan, North Korea, and Hollywood. The agency thrived during the post-war boom in magazine publishing, but those days are over and life is much harder, added to which everyone's a photographer nowadays. But not everybody can take pictures like these, which offer an unexpected view, which capture that decisive moment. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
That's it from us. Newsnight is getting underway on BBC Two, but here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.